My name is Claire Reynolds. I'm 31 years old, and it's 2024 here in Seattle, Washington. When I think back to where it all began, the laughter, the whispers, the way they'd look at me as if I'd failed before even trying, I realize how much silence can teach you. They thought I was small because my job title was. They never saw how deeply I was learning or how closely I was watching. Stay with me till the end. You'll understand how quiet strength can change everything. And if you believe in stories of transformation, don't forget to subscribe for more like this. I still remember that humid July afternoon when my aunt's voice carried across the family table. Claire's working in some small tech office, isn't she? An assistant or something. Her words landed gently, but everyone heard the smirk hidden underneath. I smiled politely, keeping my gaze on my plate. That was my first week as a junior administrative assistant at a modest software firm in downtown Seattle. I earned just enough to pay rent for my shared flat and buy second-hand business books that cluttered my bedside. Back then, I wasn't chasing a title. I was chasing understanding. Each morning, I arrived before everyone else, the quiet hum of computers still booting, the smell of burnt coffee drifting through the office. I'd walk past empty desks and glance at the CEO's glass-walled cabin, wondering what kind of mind it took to build something from nothing. "Morning, Claire," said Mark, the IT guy, half awake, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Morning," I replied, taking one gratefully. "Big day." "Always," he grinned. "You keeping up with the chaos?" "I'm learning," I said simply, and I meant it. My relatives never understood that kind of patience. They lived in a world where success had to look successful, expensive handbags, loud cars, and social media smiles. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, lit by the soft glow of my laptop, replaying online leadership lectures until 2 in the morning. Some nights I'd whisper to myself, "You're building foundations, Claire. They just can't see the blueprint yet." At work, I observed everything. The way our CEO, Eleanor Davis, spoke during investor meetings, calm, direct, never defensive. The way product managers handled failure, blaming systems, not people. I took notes quietly, every day filling small notebooks that would later become my private guide to building a company. One afternoon, Eleanor asked, "Claire, could you sit in for the meeting? Take notes for me and pay attention to the tone, not just the words." Her request startled me. I wasn't just typing minutes anymore. She wanted my perspective. When the meeting ended, she turned to me. "What did you notice?" I hesitated. Everyone agreed too quickly. It didn't feel like honesty, more like fear. Eleanor smiled. "Good eye, fear ruins innovation." That was the first time someone in power treated my silence as insight, not weakness. At family gatherings, though, the story was different. Still fetching coffee, my cousin would laugh. I'd shrug, still learning. They'd roll their eyes, thinking I'd surrendered ambition. They didn't know that every coffee run taught me timing, patience, and reading people's moods, small things that matter when you eventually lead. 3 years passed like that. Quiet work, quiet growth. Until one ordinary Tuesday morning changed everything. Eleanor called me into her office. Her tone was unreadable. "Claire, how long have you been here now?" "Almost 3 years," I replied. She leaned back. "You've been studying, haven't you?" My heart skipped. Studying. She smiled knowingly. "Leadership, management, all that. I see the books on your desk. You've been learning behind the scenes." I froze, unsure if I was in trouble. But then she continued, "I'm starting a mentorship circle, small, internal. I'd like you to join." I could barely breathe. "Me?" "Yes, you've got something most don't, quiet awareness." That day, I walked out of her office with trembling hands and a mind that felt like sunlight had just poured in after years of dawn. Every Friday evening, we'd meet, 4 mentees and a leaner, discussing case studies, market shifts, and leadership psychology. I wrote down every word. Sometimes, she'd ask us what we'd change if we ran the company. Most people spoke about cutting costs or marketing strategy. When my turn came, I said, I'd change the culture, make it brave enough to tell the truth. Alina's gaze softened. Then one day, make that your mission. Outside that circle, life didn't stop testing me. My uncle lost his business and called me for a bit of help. When I explained that I couldn't lend money, but could help him plan his next move, he sighed. You always talk like some philosopher, Claire. When will you grow up and earn real success? I laughed quietly, sooner than you think. By the time I turned 29, I'd been promoted to operations coordinator. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the nerve center. I learned how budgets, supply chains, and people all move together. I'd stay late, sometimes alone in the glow of computer screens, imagining what it would be like to steer the entire company. One night, as I was closing up, Alina walked by. You know, she said softly, the people who change companies aren't always the loudest. I looked up. Sometimes they're the ones taking notes in the corner, I replied. She smiled. Exactly. Then, just months later, Alina announced she was retiring. Whispers spread. The firm was struggling financially. Investors were losing faith. When the board met to discuss selling, I sat silently in the back, heart pounding. That night, I couldn't sleep. For hours, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was my sign, the one moment I'd been preparing for all along. I opened my notebook, the very first one I'd written in years ago. On the first page, a single line read, Understand quietly, lead gracefully. And as the city lights blinked outside my window, I whispered to myself. That night stayed with me, the hum of the fridge, the faint rain outside, and the whisper in my head that wouldn't fade. If you don't move now, you'll stay the note-taker forever. By dawn, I made my decision. I ironed my blouse, tied my hair back, and stood in front of the mirror. This is the morning you stop hiding, I told my reflection. The woman staring back didn't look extraordinary, tired eyes, calm face, but inside, a quiet storm had begun. When I reached the office, I went straight to Alina's door. She was packing boxes, wrapping framed photographs in brown paper. Claire, she said warmly, you're in early as always. I heard about the sale, I began, my voice firmer than I expected. Yes, she sighed, the board thinks it's the safest option. Fresh investment, new leadership. Her tone was gentle, but I saw the sadness behind it. This company was her life's work. I took a breath. What if the new leadership came from within? She paused mid-rap, slowly raising her eyes. From within. I want to try, I said quietly, to buy the company, or at least to lead a team that does. For a moment, she simply looked at me, not as her assistant, but as something else entirely. Then she smiled faintly. I always wondered when you'd say that. Of course, the board didn't share her confidence. When I presented my proposal 2 weeks later, the room fell into uneasy silence. 12 men in tailored suits stared at me as if I'd wandered into the wrong meeting. One of them, a tall, silver-haired director, cleared his throat. Miss Reynolds, he said, half amused, you've been an assistant, a coordinator, admirable, truly. But you're talking about buying a company valued at $40 million. I nodded. Yes, I am. And where, he chuckled, do you intend to find that kind of capital? Partnerships, I said evenly. Quiet ones, the kind that invest in people, not titles. The room erupted in soft laughter. Only Alina remained still, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Over the next month, I worked in silence again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of submission. It was building silence. I reached out to contacts I'd nurtured for years. Retired managers, small investors, a few local entrepreneurs I'd met through seminars and community talks. People who'd once brushed past me now paused to listen, because my plan wasn't grand. It was grounded. I wanted to transform the firm from a rigid corporate structure into a collaborative tech collective, where engineers, designers, and clients worked transparently. a place where fear didn't silence truth. Bit by bit, people believed. By spring, I had enough backing to present a serious counteroffer. Eleanor, true to her promise, endorsed me quietly from behind the scenes. The night before the final board vote, I visited the office alone. The lights were dim, and the city shimmered beyond the glass windows. I walked to Eleanor's empty chair and placed my notebook on the desk. It felt symbolic, the student stepping into the mentor's place. I whispered into the empty room, "You taught me to listen. Now it's my turn to speak." The next morning, I walked into the boardroom. No fear, no trembling. Only the deep calm of someone who's rehearsed in silence for years. My proposal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was logical, humane, and detailed. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then the silver-haired director spoke again, but this time without amusement. "You've built quite the case, Miss Reynolds. I can't say I expected this." "Neither did they," I replied softly, nodding toward the past that had mocked me. He smiled faintly. "Let's put it to a vote." It wasn't unanimous, far from it. But the motion passed by one decisive hand, Eleanor's. As the papers were signed, she turned to me and whispered, "Don't forget the quiet that got you here." I didn't. Owning the company didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility. I inherited not just numbers, but people, some hopeful, others doubtful. There were moments I'd sit in my new office, staring at the city skyline, wondering if I truly belonged there. But every time uncertainty crept in, I remembered that small apartment, the endless nights of study, and the girl who'd once fetched coffee and listened. She hadn't disappeared, she'd simply evolved. Months later, at another family gathering, the story came full circle. The same aunt, who'd mocked me years before, leaned across the table. "So, Claire, I heard your company's hearing." "Yes," I said, pouring tea. "We're always looking for dedicated people." My cousin, once smug, looked up eagerly. "Could you pass my resume to your HR department?" I smiled politely. "Of course, we'll see if there's a suitable role." I wasn't cruel. I didn't need to be. Their laughter had once been my lesson. Their doubt had been my drive. Now, I was living proof that humility doesn't mean weakness. It means preparation. That night, as I walked home through the cool Seattle air, I passed the old building where I'd once started, the tiny office with flickering lights and cheap carpet. I paused at the doorway, memories rushing back. The first cup of burnt coffee, the first whispered insult, the first spark of quiet determination. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Thank you for underestimating me." Back home, I opened my newest notebook, the same kind I'd used all those years ago. On the first page, I wrote, "Leadership isn't volume, it's vision." And as I closed it, I realized something simple yet profound. Silence had built my empire. Owning the company didn't feel like standing at the top. It felt like stepping into a storm. At first, everyone congratulated me with polite smiles and scripted enthusiasm. But beneath the surface, I could sense it, the unease, the quiet questions. Can she really handle it? The same colleagues who'd once shared coffee with me now waited for my approval. Every decision I made echoed across departments. Every silence was analyzed. It was strange. I dreamt of this power, yet it felt heavier than I imagined. I spent my mornings walking through the open-plan office, greeting each team. I wanted them to feel seen, not managed. "Morning, Claire," someone would say nervously. "Good morning," I'd smile, trying to sound calm even when my heart was racing. Behind the glass of my new office, I sometimes caught my reflection, the same woman, but now surrounded by expectation. It wasn't just my company anymore. It was their livelihood, their faith, their doubt. A week into my leadership, I called for a full team meeting, my first as CEO. When everyone gathered, the room was filled with quiet tension. Some employees leaned back, arms folded, waiting to see what kind of leader I'd be. I began softly. "When I first joined this company," I said, I was the assistant who fetched your coffee, organized your notes, and listened from the corners. What I learned from those corners changed me. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner. No one moved. I learned, I continued, that people don't follow titles, they follow truth. So from today, I want this to be a place where honesty isn't punished and ideas aren't measured by rank. There was a pause, then quiet clapping. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. For the first time, I felt like they might actually believe in me. But leadership isn't built on one speech. It's built in the long hours after everyone leaves. Late one evening, I sat alone in the boardroom reviewing reports. Numbers stared back at me like warnings. Revenue was down, contracts delayed, investor patience thin. Alina had warned me this would happen. Transitions test everyone, she'd said, especially the quiet ones. The door opened, and Liam Carter, one of the senior investors, walked in. His suit was sharp, his tone even sharper. "Working late, I see," he said. "Trying to keep us afloat," I replied. He smiled, sitting across from me. "You've done well, Claire. No one expected this from the girl in admin. But don't let sentiment cloud your logic. Business doesn't run on kindness." "I don't confuse kindness with weakness," I said calmly. He leaned forward. "Then prove it. Cut 20% of staff. The numbers demand it." I looked down at the spreadsheets. On paper, he wasn't wrong. But those weren't just figures, they were people. The same people who had stayed through the uncertainty, trusting me to bring change. "I'll find another way," I said finally. He stood, straightening his jacket. "Idealism is expensive, Claire. Be careful not to go bankrupt on it." Then he left, leaving only the echo of his polished shoes down the corridor. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words. Business doesn't run on kindness. Maybe he was right. Maybe my vision of a transparent, collaborative firm was naive. But then I thought of Alina, of her calm voice saying, "Fear ruins innovation." I sat up in bed, grabbed my notebook, and wrote in bold letters. "Build value, not fear." If I was going to survive this, I'd have to do it my way, quietly, patiently, but firmly. The next morning, I arrived before sunrise. The city was still wrapped in mist. I walked through the empty office, remembering my first day years ago when I'd been the one turning on the lights. Now, I was lighting the path for others. When the staff arrived, I called a small meeting with department heads. "I know the investors are nervous," I said, "but instead of cutting jobs, we'll restructure projects. People will cross-train, share roles, and innovate together. No one loses their livelihood." They looked at one another, some doubtful, others inspired. Tom, our finance lead, frowned. "That's ambitious, Claire. It could backfire." "So could fear," I replied. He nodded slowly. "All right, let's try your way." And just like that, a fragile trust began to form. By the end of the week, the atmosphere shifted. Teams started collaborating across departments. Designers helped with product pitches. Engineers suggested user experience ideas. The office buzzed again, not with fear but with purpose. One afternoon, as I walked past the break room, I overheard two employees talking. "She actually listens," one said. "It's weird but kind of refreshing." I smiled quietly and kept walking. That night, I sat by the window in my office, watching the skyline shimmer. I thought about how far I'd come, from being laughed at by family to being challenged by investors. Power, I realized, doesn't change people, it reveals them. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to be honest. In a world that rewarded noise, I was building something out of stillness. As I closed my laptop, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." For a while, everything looked calm on the surface. Projects began moving again, morale was rising, and for the first time in months, the office felt alive. But calm, I've learned, is often just the pause before another storm. It started with small things, an unsigned document here, a delayed email there. Investors who once replied within hours now took days. Then came the quiet meetings that didn't include me. I'd walk past the glass conference room and see Liam sitting with two board members, their voices low, their faces unreadable. When I entered, the conversation would stop. "Just going over numbers," Liam would say smoothly. "Nothing urgent." Something in my gut told me otherwise. A week later, Tom, our finance lead, knocked on my door. "Claire," he said softly, "have you checked the new quarterly forecast?" "No, why?" He hesitated. "Because someone's changed it, without your approval." I frowned. "Changed how?" He placed the file on my desk. Red marks, altered figures. It looked as though the company was underperforming, far worse than reality. My chest tightened. "Who authorized this?" Tom sighed. "The investor committee." Liam chaired it. For a long moment, I said nothing, just stared at the false numbers, a quiet attempt to make me look like I was failing. That evening, I attended the investors' meeting. The atmosphere was heavy, artificial smiles all around. Liam stood at the head of the table. "Claire," he greeted, "good to see you. We've been reviewing the performance data, and well, the numbers don't inspire much confidence." I slid the file across the table. "The data you adjusted, you mean?" The room froze. Liam's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying," I said quietly. "I'm statting. You've manipulated projections to justify cutting staff." One of the board members cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Claire." "No," I interrupted gently. "If you want transparency, start with honesty. I built this company on that promise." There was a long silence. Liam forced a thin smile. "Passion is admirable," he said, "but leadership requires more than emotion. Investors want results, not speeches." "Then let's show them results," I replied. "Real ones." I stood, collected my files, and left the room without another word. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from clarity. That night, I sat alone in my office, the city outside blurred by rain. For the first time in years, I felt that old ache, the one that used to creep in when people underestimated me. But this time it didn't sting, it steadied me. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Let them doubt. You lead through proof, not noise." The next morning, I called an emergency meeting, not with investors, but with my staff. I stood before them, calm and direct. "I need everyone to know something," I began. "We're being tested, not by competitors, but from within, and I won't let fear undo what we've built." Whispers spread through the room. I continued. "I won't name names, but I will say this. If we deliver our upcoming projects ahead of schedule, truth will defend itself." They looked at one another, uncertain at first, then nodding slowly. They believed me, maybe not because I was flawless, but because I was real. For 3 weeks, we worked like never before. Late nights, early mornings, endless calls. I was there with them, not above them. I ordered food for the team, reviewed code, tested prototypes, encouraged exhausted designers to go home and rest. The air was thick with determination. One engineer said, "It feels like we're fighting for something bigger than a paycheck." I smiled. "You are." By the end of that month, the numbers spoke louder than any investor. Revenue up by 14%. A new client onboarded. A project completed 3 weeks early. I prepared a detailed report and sent it to the board, with proof, receipts, and timestamps. The next day, Liam requested another meeting. "Impressive work," he said, smiling tightly as I entered. "Thank you," I replied, sitting opposite him. He folded his hands. "I'll admit I underestimated you, but be careful, Claire. You're making powerful people uncomfortable." "I'm not here to comfort power," I said. "I'm here to make it accountable." He laughed softly. "You sound like a leaner." "I'll take that as a compliment." His eyes lingered on me, half respect, half warning. "You've won this round," he said finally, standing. "But storms don't end, they change direction." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I've learned to walk through them." After he left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer through the rain. For a long moment, I let the quiet settle around me. In that stillness, I realized something profound. Success wasn't about applause or victory. It was about composure. You don't silence your critics by shouting louder. You silence them by surviving longer. Later that night, as I packed my bag, Tom walked in with a faint smile. "The team wanted me to tell you. They're proud of you, Claire." I looked up surprised. "Proud of me?" He nodded. "You didn't just lead the company, you protected it." I smiled faintly. "Then we're all protecting each other." He paused at the door. "You know Liam won't stop, right?" "I know," I said, closing my notebook, "but neither will I." When I finally left the building, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the amber glow of the streetlights. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, the kind that feels like truth. And in that quiet moment, I thought of my past self again, the girl mocked at family dinners, sitting in the corner taking notes. She'd never imagined this life. But she'd built it piece by piece, quietly, completely. The following week felt heavier than usual. The tech firm's atmosphere had changed. Small things I used to overlook now stung with meaning. The way people paused mid-sentence when I entered a meeting. The hushed laughter that followed as soon as I walked past. It wasn't direct cruelty, just invisible walls built from silent judgment. I began noticing how easily people dismissed me. I'd pitch an idea during Monday meetings, only to hear the same suggestion repeated by someone else a few minutes later, this time greeted by nods and praise. "Good point, Derek," someone would say, as if my words hadn't existed at all. It wasn't rage that filled me, it was realization. I was invisible in a room I helped build. So I started studying, not just the company, but the people. The way leadership talked, how decisions were made, what problems never got solved because no one wanted to touch them. I became a quiet observer, an invisible strategist. One evening, after everyone had left, I sat at my desk under the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dust from the old carpet. I stared at the company's monthly reports, scanning for patterns no one else cared to notice. Expenses, client retention, growth projections, every number told a story. And buried between those figures, I saw opportunity. The company was bleeding money through outdated processes and ignored clients. I started taking notes, not as a junior assistant, but as someone preparing for something much bigger. I wrote down what could be improved, who was underperforming, what the market lacked. Those notes became my secret blueprint. Then came the evening of my cousin's engagement dinner. It was at a fancy downtown restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths, dim golden light, and prices printed without currency symbols. Everyone was there. My uncles in expensive suits, my aunts with their glittering jewelry, and my cousins bragging about their careers as lawyers, bankers, and executives. When I walked in, wearing a plain navy dress and a simple smile, I could feel it. The shift in tone, the slight pity in their eyes. "Claire," my Aunt Lydia exclaimed, her voice too bright to be genuine. "Still working at that little company of yours?" I smiled softly. "Yes, still there." She leaned closer, pretending to whisper but loud enough for the table to hear. "You're wasting your potential, darling. You could do so much better." My cousin Brad chuckled, swirling his wine. "Maybe she's waiting for a promotion to coffee manager." Laughter rippled across the table. I looked at them all, these people who measured success by how loudly they could talk about it. For a brief moment, I felt the old ache, that sting of humiliation. But then something shifted inside me. Instead of defending myself, I just nodded slowly and said, "Maybe I am." Then I smiled, because I was taking notes, again. That night, I couldn't sleep. The laughter from dinner echoed in my mind, not as pain, but as fuel. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. The soft blue light hit my face as I pulled up online courses, finance, management, negotiation. If they saw me as small, fine. I'd build something too big for their imagination. Every night after work, I studied. Leadership models, tech trends, investment patterns. I started shadowing senior managers under the excuse of assisting with documentation. What they didn't know was that I was learning how to run a company. Not just this company, any company. And every time someone dismissed me, I smiled quietly, thinking, "You're showing me exactly what not to be." One Friday morning, during a strategy meeting, the CEO, Mark, asked if anyone had fresh ideas to reduce client churn. The room fell silent. People shuffled their notes, avoiding his gaze. I raised my hand. "I've been tracking some engagement metrics," I began, keeping my tone calm. "I think we're losing clients because of poor onboarding and lack of follow-up. If we invest in client relationship tracking and train support staff differently, we could increase retention by at least 15%. The room blinked. Mark tilted his head. "You've been tracking metrics." "Yes," I said simply, "after hours." He nodded slowly, intrigued. "All right, Claire, write me a proposal." It was a small moment, barely noticed by anyone else. But to me, it was the first flicker of recognition, the first crack of light through years of quiet walls. That weekend, while others relaxed, I poured myself into that proposal. Every detail mattered: charts, timelines, solutions. When I handed it in, Mark looked impressed. "You've got an analytical mind," he said. Inside, I wanted to tell him that analytical minds are often born from being underestimated. But instead, I smiled and said, "Thank you." He gave me a rare opportunity to lead a pilot project. It wasn't much, but it was the start of something that would change everything. Because while they saw me as the quiet assistant, I was already building the foundation for ownership. And they just didn't know it yet. The pilot project began on a rainy Tuesday morning. Seattle's sky was its usual gray blanket, drizzling against the office windows as if mirroring my quiet nerves. I wasn't leading a big team, just 4 people who barely noticed me before. But for the first time, the project was mine. We were assigned a neglected client account that had almost slipped away. No one expected us to succeed. In truth, that made it easier. When people expect nothing, you can build everything without noise. I gathered the team in the small meeting room, the one tucked behind the break area. "I know this isn't the most exciting project," I said, "but it's a chance to rebuild something broken and learn along the way." They exchanged half-hearted nods. I didn't blame them. Leadership, I was learning, wasn't about commanding, it was about convincing. So I began by listening. For the first week, I spent hours talking to the client's staff, understanding what went wrong. Their issues weren't technical, they were emotional. They felt ignored, unseen, forgotten. I recognized that pain. So I rebuilt the connection, not through big promises, but through consistent communication. Daily updates, small check-ins, quiet reliability. Slowly, their tone changed. One afternoon, during a call, the client's representative laughed and said, "You're the first person who's actually listening to us." That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because that's all I'd ever wanted, to be heard. Weeks passed, and the results spoke for themselves. The client not only stayed but renewed their contract for another year. Our metrics improved by 20%, higher than anyone predicted. Mark, the CEO, called me into his office. He stood by the window, arms crossed, looking at the city lights flickering against the rain. "Claire." "I've seen the numbers," he said, turning to me. "You did good, really good." I smiled softly. "Thank you." He gestured for me to sit. "What made you approach it this way?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. People don't leave because of bad service. They leave because they stop feeling valued. I just made sure they didn't. He nodded slowly, impressed. "You've got insight most people overlook." That night, when I walked out of the office, the rain had stopped. The pavement shimmered with reflections of city lights, as if the world had quietly applauded. From there, things began to shift. My ideas were no longer ignored in meetings. Colleagues who once smirked now leaned forward when I spoke. The invisible walls began to crumble, one brick at a time. But I didn't let the recognition distract me. I kept learning finance, leadership, investment. I started saving aggressively, investing carefully. I was still the quiet assistant on paper, but mentally, I was already preparing for something much larger. Then, one Friday evening, something unexpected happened. Mark asked me to stay behind after the meeting. "I'm thinking about restructuring," he said, closing the boardroom door. "You've been here a while. You understand the system better than most. If I promote you to operations coordinator, can I count on you to steady the ship?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My chest tightened, not out of fear, but disbelief. "Yes," I said finally, "you can count on me." That night, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the office lights fade. I thought of every laugh, every comment from my relatives, every time I'd been told I was settling for less. And I realized I wasn't settling. I was growing quietly. The following months were a blur of progress. I led more projects, built stronger teams, and even trained new hires. People started coming to me for advice. The quiet girl in the corner had somehow become a pillar of the company. But success didn't make me proud, it made me humble, because I'd seen both sides, the mockery and the meaning. One evening, as I was leaving, my phone buzzed. A message from my cousin Brad. "Hey Claire, saw your company's name on a big tech partnership deal. That's the one you work at, right? Wow, you've really made something of yourself." I read the message twice. Then I smiled, typed back a polite "Thanks, Brad, hope you're well," and locked my phone. Some stories don't need loud answers. Quiet success speaks loud enough. But beneath that calm surface, another shift was happening. Mark was growing older, tired, talking about retirement. Rumors began floating about him selling the company. I didn't react outwardly, but inside something stirred. Because this company wasn't just where I worked. It was where I learned, where I transformed, where I had quietly taken notes all along. And if it ever went up for sale, I knew exactly what I'd do. It began with a single line in the Monday bulletin. A quiet announcement that changed everything. Effective end of quarter, CEO Mark Callahan will be stepping down after 27 years of service. I read it twice. The words didn't fully register at first. They just sat there on the glowing screen, still and calm, like a secret waiting to be understood. Mark was leaving. The man who had unknowingly mentored me through his silence, who'd given me my first real chance. The one person in that building who'd seen past the title on my badge. The air in the office that day felt different. Conversations buzzed with speculation. Who would take his place? What it meant for the company? What kind of shakeup was coming? For most people, it was gossip. For me, it was a signal. Something inside me shifted. That evening, Mark called me into his office. The blinds were half-drawn, streaks of fading daylight cutting across the dark wood of his desk. He looked tired, but peaceful, a man who had made his decision. "Claire," he said, smiling faintly, "close the door, would you?" I did, and he gestured to the seat across from him. "You've probably seen the memo." "I have," I said quietly. He nodded. "It's time. I've built this place from scratch, but it's time to hand it over. Someone else should take it to the next stage." There was a long pause. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the soft ticking of the wall clock. "Do you know who's buying?" I asked. He gave a small, thoughtful smile. "We're in talks with a few groups. But I'll be honest, Claire, I wish someone who understood this place could take it on. Not just for profit, but for purpose." He looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, this company needs people like you." When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the spark of possibility. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove aimlessly through the city, the skyline of Seattle glowing against the dark waters. My mind replayed every moment, every late-night study session, every quiet humiliation that had shaped me. Could I really do it? Could I buy the company? It sounded absurd, unrealistic, but then again, so did everything I'd already overcome. I thought of the nights I'd stayed in the office long after everyone left, learning how things worked. I'd seen the numbers, the structure, the flaws. I knew this company better than anyone. I wasn't rich, but I was prepared. And sometimes, prepared is more powerful than lucky. The next few weeks were a storm. Meetings, whispers, internal memos. Rumors confirmed what Mark had hinted: the company was going up for acquisition. Private equity groups were circling. Some saw it as an easy investment. Others wanted to merge it and lay off half the staff. I watched it all unfold quietly. Then one evening, I went home, brewed a cup of black tea, and opened the old leather notebook I'd been filling for years, the one filled with my secret notes. Inside were pages of insights, data and strategies I'd gathered silently over the years. This wasn't just a notebook anymore. It was a roadmap to ownership. For weeks I planned. I met mentors, investors, anyone who would listen. I learned about funding models, equity partnerships, and business buyouts. It was terrifying, stepping into a world I'd only watched from the sidelines. One night, after a long call with a potential investor, I looked out the window of my tiny flat, city lights shimmering through the mist, and whispered to myself, "You've spent your whole life taking notes, Claire. Now it's time to write the story." At work, I carried on as usual. No one suspected what I was preparing. They just saw me as calm, composed, focused, the same quiet Claire. Inside, I was building something invisible. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the official announcement. The company would be sold to the highest bidder within 2 months. It was public now. My heart raced as I stared at the email. This was it. The very place where I'd once been mocked for being too quiet, too soft, too small, was now on the table. And I was ready to make my move. That weekend, I visited my parents. My mother poured tea, her eyes warm with curiosity. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Is everything all right?" I smiled. "Everything's about to change, Mum." She tilted her head. "Good change or bad?" I looked out the window, at the golden evening light falling across the garden. "I think," I said softly, "it's the kind of change that takes a lifetime to prepare for." That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by notes, documents, and quiet determination. The city outside was asleep. And in that silence, I began drafting a proposal that would change everything, not just for me, but for every person who ever believed being quiet meant being weak. Because when you learn from the shadows long enough, you start to see how to move in the light. The first meeting was nothing like I imagined. It wasn't held in a boardroom or a sleek office, but in a small cafe near the waterfront, a place where no one would expect a quiet assistant to be planning an acquisition. Across the table sat Daniel Hayes, a venture consultant I'd been introduced to by a mutual contact. He was older, composed, the kind of man who had seen 100 ambitious people try and fail. "So," he said, stirring his coffee, "you want to buy the company you work for?" I nodded, calm but firm. "Yes." He leaned back, studying me. "You don't look like someone who takes big risks." "I don't," I replied softly, "but I do take careful ones." He smiled faintly. "That's rarer than you think." For 2 hours, we went through numbers, valuation estimates, capital requirements. He didn't sugarcoat anything. It was going to be difficult, impossible, almost. "You'll need partners," Daniel said. "People who believe in you, investors who trust your vision." I knew that. I'd already started reaching out quietly to people I'd met through the years, old clients who'd seen my work, colleagues who respected my leadership. What surprised me was how many of them said yes. "Claire," one of the clients told me over the phone, "if you're the one running that company, we'll stay for life. You're the reason we never left in the first place." That moment caught me off guard. For years, I'd seen myself as the one learning, not leading. But now it was clear I'd been leading quietly all along. Weeks turned into months. Days blurred into nights as I drafted plans, projections, and financial outlines. My evenings were filled with spreadsheets and calls, my mornings with silent confidence hidden behind calm smiles. I never told anyone at the office what I was doing, not even Mark. I wanted to build something real before I spoke. Then one evening, I found myself standing outside the office building, looking up at the logo glowing softly against the night sky. The same logo I once admired as a new hire, wide-eyed, unsure, invisible. Now I was preparing to buy it. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like destiny earned through discipline. As the bidding process began, I submitted my proposal through an investment group Daniel helped me structure. It was clean, strategic, backed by real data and loyal partners. When the board saw the name on the proposal, Reynolds Innovations, they didn't know it was me at first. But when Mark saw the financials, the client retention records, and the leadership notes, he paused. He knew. He called me into his office the next morning. "Claire," he said quietly, holding the folder, "is this you?" I didn't flinch. "Yes." For a long moment, he said nothing. Just looked at me, the way one looks at something they'd hoped would happen but never truly expected. Then he smiled. "You know," he said softly, "I always wondered what you were writing in those notebooks." I smiled back. "Plans." He leaned back, exhaling. "Well, you've earned this, more than anyone I know." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of negotiations. Other bidders had deeper pockets, louder voices, more power. But I had something they didn't: understanding. I knew the company's soul, its people, its history. During the final presentation to the board, I stood in front of the same executives who once saw me as the quiet assistant. "I've seen this company through every phase," I said steadily. "Not from above, but from within. I know its flaws and I know how to fix them. My vision isn't just to own it, it's to grow it, with the same values it was built on." No theatrics, no grand speeches, just calm truth. When I finished, there was silence. Then Mark, sitting at the end of the table, nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the right person was here all along." The night before the results were announced, I barely slept. The rain tapped softly against my window, the same way it did all those years ago when I was still learning, still dreaming. I made tea, sat by the window, and whispered to myself, if it's meant for me, it will come. And if not, I'd still have built something unshakable within myself. The next morning, the call came. Daniel's voice on the other end was calm, but trembling with restrained excitement. "Claire," he said, "it's done. The board approved your offer." For a second, the world went silent. Then, softly, a smile spread across my face. The quiet girl had done it. The same company where she'd once been overlooked, laughed at, dismissed, now belonged to her. That evening, I stood outside the office again. Same building, same lights. Only this time, the key in my hand wasn't for the employee entrance. It was for the owner's office. I unlocked the door slowly, stepped inside, and whispered into the silence. "I told you I was taking notes." The first morning as owner felt strangely still. No fireworks, no applause, just the soft hum of the city outside my window and the faint aroma of coffee drifting through my flat. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the document on my laptop, the official confirmation of ownership. My name was there, clear and firm. Claire Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer. For a long while, I just looked at it, not out of disbelief, but out of quiet gratitude. I thought of the long nights, the silent judgment, the laughter of relatives who thought working for a small tech firm was beneath them. Now that firm was mine. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. Walking into the building that day was surreal. The same reception desk, the same staircase, the same people, though now their eyes held something new, respect mixed with disbelief. I could feel the whispers following me, but they weren't mocking anymore. They were wondering, is that really her? She owns the place now. How? But I didn't need to answer. My presence spoke for itself. I greeted everyone I passed, calm and kind. I didn't want my leadership to erase the past. I wanted it to rewrite it quietly. When I reached the top floor, the door that once said CEO now had my name engraved beneath. I paused for a moment before walking in. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and rain. The city skyline stretched wide before me, the morning light glinting off the glass towers. This view used to feel distant, a place reserved for someone else's dream. Now it was part of mine. I placed my notebook, the same one I'd carried since my first day, on the desk. The pages were filled with years of ideas, lessons, and small, invisible victories. I opened it to the last page and wrote 3 words. Begin with grace. Later that day, I called for a staff meeting. It wasn't in the big boardroom. I wanted it where everyone could fit, no titles, no hierarchy, just people. When the room filled, there was a strange energy, curiosity, hope, a little fear. I stood at the front, holding a small index card. Most of you know me, I began. For years, I worked among you, not above you. I've seen what this company can be when people are valued and what it loses when they're not. I paused, letting the silence breathe. My promise is simple. This company won't be built on noise. It'll be built on purpose. We'll listen, learn, and grow together. No corporate jargon, no rehearsed inspiration, just truth. When I finished, there was a quiet moment, then a ripple of applause, not loud but genuine. And for the first time, I saw what leadership really looked like, not commanding a room but connecting with it. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. I restructured departments, promoted people who'd been overlooked, and opened communication channels that had long been shut. We began hosting open floor Fridays, where anyone, from interns to engineers, could pitch ideas directly. The creativity that came from those sessions amazed me. The company felt alive again. But not everyone celebrated. Some of the senior managers, the ones used to hierarchy, found it difficult to accept my leadership. They'd whisper in corners, doubt my decisions, question my calm approach. I didn't confront them with anger. I just let results speak. Because I'd learned something powerful. You can't argue with consistency. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered, and a familiar voice filled the line. Claire. It was my cousin Brad. I could hear the unease in his tone, polite, careful, nothing like the mocking voice from years ago. Hey, I said evenly, how are you? He cleared his throat. I'm good. Listen, I heard about your company. It's incredible what you've done. I smiled faintly. Thank you. There was a pause, then quietly. I was wondering if you're hearing. My firm's downsizing. Thought I'd ask. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was reflective. I thought of all those dinners, all those laughs, the jokes about me settling for less. And now here he was, humbly asking for a place in the company they once mocked. Send your CV, I said gently. HR will take a look. I kept my tone professional, kind, and calm, because power isn't in revenge. It's in restraint. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a moment. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. That night, I stayed late at the office. The building was silent, the city shimmering beyond the glass. I walked to the window and looked out, the reflection of the woman in the glass, no longer the invisible assistant. Just someone who stayed true, worked hard, and built her peace one decision at a time. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Because everything I had once dreamed of wasn't a dream anymore. It was mine. I stood in the glass meeting room, the skyline behind me glowing like 1,000 possibilities. The same city that once watched me rush through rain-soaked mornings, clutching a bus pass and cheap coffee, now looked back at me with respect. Across the long wooden table sat the people who had mocked me years ago, not just relatives now, but potential employees. Their nervous smiles and carefully chosen words told a story louder than any apology ever could. I'd been preparing for this day without even realizing it. Every night spent studying management, every mistake I'd once been scolded for, every quiet observation of how true leaders worked, it all led here. "Claire," one of them said, clearing his throat, "we're so proud of what you've achieved. You've really made it big." I smiled softly. "Thank you," I said. "It's been a journey." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the HR folder on the table. "Actually, the reason we're here." I finished his sentence gently. "You're looking for positions." Silence. He gave a small, embarrassed nod. His wife, my cousin, looked down at her lap, pretending to fix her bracelet. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was understanding. The kind that comes only when you've outgrown the need to prove anything. Later that day, I sat in my office alone. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of the city below. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, the one from my first day at the company. My badge was crooked, my smile uncertain. I remembered how everyone back then treated me like a background character in my own life. And yet here I was, writing payrolls, signing contracts, deciding futures. I whispered under my breath, "You did it, Claire. But you didn't do it to show them, you did it to show yourself." There was a knock on the door. It was Jamie, my HR head. "They've all submitted their CVs," she said, hesitating. "Do you want to consider them?" I looked up at her, a woman who had stood by me during every long night and tough meeting. "Shortlist whoever is qualified," I said calmly. "No bias, no emotion, just skill." Jamie smiled knowingly. "You're a good person, Claire." "Not good," I said with a faint laugh. "Just learned." That evening, I took the long way home. The air was cool, the kind of calm that felt earned. I passed the little diner where I used to eat cheap sandwiches between shifts. The same waiter, now older, smiled when he recognized me. "Been a while, miss," he said. "Yeah," I smiled. "A lifetime, it feels like." He chuckled. "Still working hard." I thought for a moment, "Working smarter now." He nodded with a grin. "Knew you'd do something big one day." At home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights blinking like gentle reminders of everything that once felt impossible. My phone buzzed, a message from my aunt. "We heard you're hearing. Maybe you could find something for Mark. He's struggling lately." I read it twice, the same Mark who used to joke that I'd never make it anywhere. I typed back simply, "Tell him to apply through the official site. HR will handle it." Then I locked my phone, leaned back and smiled. It wasn't coldness. It was peace, the kind that comes when you stop needing validation from people who once doubted you. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, I walked into the office early. My staff greeted me warmly. The company buzzed with life, new projects, new ideas, a new generation learning just as I once did. I paused outside the boardroom, where my name, Claire Reynolds, CEO, was etched on the frosted glass. Running my fingers over it, I whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Because the truth was, success didn't erase the past. It transformed it, turned the hurt into hunger and the silence into strength. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, ready to lead. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was proving anyone wrong. I was simply becoming everything I was meant to be. The morning light was soft, the kind that slips gently through office blinds and paints the room gold. I stood by the window of my corner office, the skyline stretching endlessly before me. It had been almost 6 years since I'd taken ownership of the company, and yet some mornings still felt surreal. The phone buzzed quietly on my desk. A name flashed on the screen I hadn't seen in years, Aunt Margaret. I hesitated. For a moment, my heart stilled in that silent pull between the past and present. Then I answered. "Claire," her voice trembled slightly, "it's been a long time." "It has," I said softly, looking out at the clouds reflecting on the glass buildings. She cleared her throat, trying to sound steady. "I wouldn't have called unless it was important. It's about Mark." My chest tightened. Mark, my cousin, the same man who once laughed in my face at family dinners, telling everyone I'd settled for a desk job. The same man who once said I lacked ambition. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "He's not doing well. His startup collapsed. The debts are piling, and he's ashamed to ask you himself." Her voice cracked, and in that moment, I didn't hear the woman who once mocked me for not marrying rich. I heard a mother, desperate, fragile, afraid for her child. I exhaled slowly. "I understand," I said. "Send me his CV." Later that evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table, laptop open, Mark's resume on the screen. The words blurred for a second as my mind drifted back. The laughter, the whispers, the mocking glances across dinner tables. They had all been so sure of their path, chasing image, not growth. And me, I'd been the quiet one, writing ideas in the back of a notebook no one cared to read. Now I was reading his. He'd tried hard, startups, partnerships, everything. But the tone of desperation in his listed achievements told the truth between the lines. I closed the laptop, resting my hand on it, and whispered to myself, "Grace, not grudge." The next morning, I walked into HR. Jamie looked up, surprised. "Morning, Claire, everything all right?" "Can you schedule an interview with Mark Reynolds?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't question it. "Of course. For which department?" I paused. "Business development. Let's see what he brings to the table." She nodded. "You're handling this personally." "Yes," I said, straightening my jacket. "Some stories need to close full circle." The interview day came faster than I expected. I entered the meeting room before him, setting my notes down. The glass walls reflected my calm, collected figure, a stark contrast to the trembling intern I used to be in the same building. The door opened quietly. Mark stepped in. His face had aged, not in years, but in weight, the kind that life gives when pride has been humbled. He froze when he saw me. "Claire." I offered a small nod. "Please sit." He obeyed, his hands fidgeting slightly. "I didn't think you'd be the one interviewing me." "Well," I said, "I believe in meeting people face to face. It helps me understand more than a CV ever can." He swallowed. "I don't know where to begin." "Start with what you've learned," I said, "not what you've lost." His eyes softened. "I learned that success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about not losing yourself while trying." For a moment, I just watched him, the cousin who once stood taller than me, now speaking like a man who'd finally seen his own reflection clearly. The interview ended quietly. No promises, no rejections, just a handshake, firm, real, human. After he left, I sat in that silence again, the same silence that had once surrounded me when everyone else's laughter echoed louder. But this time, it didn't sting. It soothed. I thought of all the people who'd once belittled me, not with cruelty, but with ignorance. They never knew the power of the quiet ones. I looked out at the city skyline, whispering to myself, some victories aren't meant to be celebrated. They're meant to be understood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the empty halls of the office, the same halls that once echoed with orders, deadlines, and ambition. Now they felt peaceful. I stopped at the spot where my old cubicle once stood. The place where I'd stayed late, taking notes, listening to my mentor, building dreams no one saw coming. A tear welled in my eye, not of pain, but gratitude. Everything I'd endured, the humiliation, the whispers, the doubt, had carved the leader I'd become. I whispered to the empty floor, "You don't rise by proving people wrong. You rise by refusing to stop learning." And as I walked back toward my office, the words echoed in my mind, gentle, grounded, and full of peace. The journey had almost come full circle. But one chapter still remained, forgiveness. The next morning was unusually still. The air carried that quiet calm that comes just before change. I sat in my office, looking out across Seattle's skyline, the city that had witnessed my rise, my silence, and my strength. Mark's interview had ended 2 days ago, but the weight of it still lingered in my thoughts. He hadn't asked for pity, nor forgiveness. He'd simply owned his mistakes, something I hadn't expected. And now, I was the one left to decide what came next. I picked up my pen, tapping it lightly against the table. The contract folder lay in front of me, Mark's name printed neatly at the top. Was it right to bring him into the company, the same one where I'd once been mocked for dreaming? Or was forgiveness the higher form of victory? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I said. Jamie stepped inside, holding a cup of tea. "You look like you've been at war with your thoughts again." I smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." She placed the cup down. "It's about him, isn't it?" I nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? I used to imagine what I'd say to them if I ever had the chance. But now that I do, I don't feel anger, just clarity." Jamie studied me for a moment. Maybe that's what growth really looks like. Not the power to punish, but the peace to move on. I looked down at the contract, then back at her. "You think I should hire him?" "I think," she said softly, "you should do what aligns with who you are now, not who they once made you feel like." That night, I sat by the window at home, the city lights shimmering against the glass. I thought of every moment that had brought me here, the long bus rides, the quiet tears, the endless notes I'd scribbled under fluorescent lights. And suddenly, I realized forgiveness wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the past. I didn't want my success to be built on resentment. I wanted it to be a bridge, not a wall. The next morning, I walked into the office with a decision. When I entered HR, Jamie looked up instantly, searching my face for an answer. "Offer him the position," I said. Her brows rose slightly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Not because he's family, but because he's ready to learn. Everyone deserves a chance, even those who once misunderstood you." She nodded quietly. "I'll send the confirmation today." That evening, I received a message. "Thank you, Claire. I don't deserve this, but I won't waste it." I stared at the words for a long moment before replying. "This isn't about deserving. It's about doing better. Welcome to the team." I pressed send, exhaling a deep, steady breath. And for the first time in years, I felt completely free. Weeks passed. Mark started his new role humbly, showing up early, listening, learning. The arrogance that once defined him was gone, replaced by something I recognized: quiet determination. Sometimes I'd see him in meetings, taking notes like I once did, and it made me smile. Not because he reminded me of the past, but because it showed how people can change when life humbles them enough to listen. One evening, after everyone had left, Mark knocked softly on my door. "Can I come in?" "Of course," I said. He hesitated at the doorway, then spoke, voice low. "I just wanted to say, I used to laugh at you because I couldn't understand you. You were patient when we were loud, focused when we were shallow, and I thought that made you weak." He paused, eyes glistening. "But now I see you were the strongest of us all." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all learn, Mark," I said gently, "just at different speeds." He smiled faintly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I shook my head. "I didn't do this for you. I did it because the woman I once was, the one everyone doubted, deserved to see what forgiveness looks like." After he left, I stood alone in the quiet again. The city outside shimmered in the twilight, the horizon fading into gold and blue. I realized something profound that night. You don't win by rising above others. You win by rising above your old self. That's what this journey had been all along. Not revenge, not triumph, but transformation. I turned off the office lights and stepped outside. As the doors closed behind me, I felt a calmness I hadn't known before. For years, I'd carried their words, every laugh, every dismissal, as fuel. Now, I carried only gratitude. Because without them, I'd never have learned the strength of quiet perseverance. And as I walked down the corridor one last time, I whispered to myself, "Grace wins, always.